And he said, if you would not have committed such horrible sins, God would not have brought such a horrible punishment, such as me, upon you.
I am not going to devote an episode to what everyone expects me to. It's good to have enemies. Of course, the controversy led to you selling some books. There's no question, because controversy creates cash. That's kind of what I've been saying with authors having controversial personalities, bucking trends, going against the grain. But this author, who we'll call Ally, challenged me to a charity boxing match the week that we buried my mother. Now, I'll say this once, and only once. My family tragedy is not there for you to turn into a circus, and you will not. Stay away from me, stay away from my family, and stay out of my affairs. And I don't intend to devote any more time to you. Certainly not more time than I would my mother or my co-host. And that's all I'm going to say about it. Anyway, you believe that? I knew the guy was retarded, but charity boxing match. What's charity ever done for me? Oh, rim shot. How you doing, Ben?
Very good. Thank you for having me on the What the Fuck podcast again, Mr. Mark Maron. Sorry, you need to provide some levity after that.
Of course. Well, I don't know, man. What do we start with? Should we talk about the Jack Ketchum anthology?
Yeah, we can start with that.
So apparently, Jack Ketchum, if I have my information correct, signed off, God rest his soul, on an anthology tribute to him. And Monica O'Rourke, who I'm vaguely familiar with her work, she's published, I believe, through Deadite and those high-end literary presses that do special editions, right? Have you read any of her stuff?
Yeah, I've read a couple of her short stories and her novel, what's it called, Suffer the Flesh.
That's right, I've heard that one's a classic. I'm sure she is very talented. So, what is it? This Jack Ketchum anthology from Hellbound Books, they sent out invitations to authors, is that right?
Yeah, my understanding of what happened is they had listed the authors that had accepted the invitations, and people were upset because there was only one woman on there. But apparently what happened is people kind of jumped the gun in criticizing them because they had these were just authors that had accepted the invitations. These weren't all the authors that had been invited. And they were apparently like adding to it as they accepted. Now, I do admit that that's a very bad way to go about it, because they should wait till they like actually have like the stories accepted and ready to go before they announce anyone.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, I do think people kind of jump the gun in criticizing who they invited.
Yeah. Well, I'm just looking over this here, and she says, One woman, and from what I can see, the majority of these writers likely have no real clue who Jack Ketchum was, other than someone they read or saw on a panel. I thought some of these people were her peers.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I didn't recognize most of the names that I read through.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a lot of authors out there, so I can't say whether Ketchum actually had a relationship with these people or not. Um, or I do recall one of the editors saying that they did also want to try to invite some newer writers to the to it, so that may be part of it.
Well, she says here, thanks so much for making sure a number of his dear friends, including me, Safira Giron. I'm going to butcher the names because I haven't heard these people, their names pronounced, in person or in audio. So Linda Addison, Yvonne Navarro, Anya Martin, Kelly Lehman, and so many others weren't included. Thank you for making sure a single woman was on this extensive list. Extensive is misspelled. I can't begin to imagine how many POC or LGBTQ were excluded as well. Well, first of all, that should have no factor. That should have no bearing on the merit of the work itself. But they're not judging this by merit of the story. They're judging it by name value. Is that correct?
I suppose that's what they're doing. The thing is that, like, I don't really understand what's going on behind the scenes. Like I said, it was a very bad move to put out the names of the authors who had just accepted the invitation, because I would assume that if they said, yes, I'll submit or write a story, that doesn't guarantee they'll even have a story in there. So I can't say that Hellbound Books is handling this as well as they could. That going on your end.
Well, I know how disastrous it can be trying to manage an anthology. I got into one thinking that, it was just going to come together, and, it's like it got to be this millstone around my neck, and I just let it get away. I would say there are quite a bit of anthologies that never happen, right?
Yeah, there's definitely quite a few. I've seen calls for ones that never came out.
Yeah. Well, Monica finishes here. Maybe next time do your damned research, and trust me, the names I mentioned above would have added a wonderful richness, an amazing depth to your book, because Dallas loved and respected women and had an amazing relationship with each one of us. I'm pretty sure I can say his relationships with us differed greatly from his male relationships. Too damn bad you'll never know. I think she's overreacting because, well, first of all, it's not her anthology. Second of all, she should do her damned research if it's true that they were sending out invitations and she declined. Did you hear that?
I heard that she had been invited. I didn't know that she had actually declined it, which seems a little counterproductive.
Yeah. Then Wrath James White has to weigh in. So without reading
that's actually where I first heard about it. Controversy.
Without reading the table of contents, which I never do, I accepted, mostly on the strength of the fact that Dallas's estate had signed off on it. It has since been brought to my attention that there have been major exclusions from the TOC, most notably Linda Addison and Mona J. O'Rourke. There are no guarantees. I mean, in anthologies, I mean, if they have no oversight, or input into who's going in it, it's really up in the air. I mean, they could put whoever they want in if the estate signed off on it, correct? I mean,
that's correct. Which, it's possible that they are just completely fumbling it, which is a tragedy if they are.
Yeah.
And with Wrath, he seemed very sincere about it and was just going by what he'd been told by people he probably trusted. Monica did seem a little bit harsher than she needed to be, though. If she was going directly from the table of contents, I guess I kind of see where her reaction came from.
Mm-hmm. Well, because you're friends with someone doesn't mean that you get a spot in anything. I mean, or I guess it does with the buddy system in publishing, but
well, I would hope that anthology, dedicated to Ketchum would have some of his close friends in it.
That's true. That's true too. But I don't think that it needed this kind of display. I think there were better ways to handle it than this, for sure. Right?
Right. I'm not sure if Monica actually like approached Hellbound and asked about it or anything like that. But like I said, the reason I heard the other side is because one of the editors is a Facebook friend of mine who, mentioned explicitly that what they were doing was listing the people who had accepted the invitation.
Yeah. This is why I can't write anymore, Ben, at least for right now. I swear, these people in these small presses and this kind of independent outlook on literature, they poisoned my appreciation of the written word. I can't do it. I love to read, and I have published some things under pseudonyms, but as far as putting my name on something, they've just severely depreciated my passion for it, and I'm not. That doesn't make me a victim, but I mean, geez, every time you turn around, they're criticizing some little, startup publishers, approach. They can approach it however they wish. Now, certainly there's something to be said for authenticity if, they're excluding friends, but I don't think that this display was necessary. And, we should, as far as evaluating a table of contents and submissions and everything, whether they're a person of color, LGBTQ, or a woman or male, shouldn't factor in. What should matter is the merit and the quality of the story.
Right. I do think there is some merit to the idea of having diverse voices in fiction, because I do believe that people of different backgrounds would come up with unique stories. Some of the more like hardcore like pro diversity people, a lot of them, the problem is they don't really want an actual diversity. They essentially want a Benetton ad where people of different races and sexualities and so forth are all saying the same thing.
That's true. I'm so glad you realized that, brother. The thing is, sorry about that. Anyway, so the thing is, there was a story in an anthology called "The Children of Old Leech." You've heard of that, right?
I haven't now.
Okay, it was put out by Word Horde, I think. And it was celebrating that kind of cosmic horror in the vein of Laird Barron, I guess. And there was a story in there about a guy who was jumping trains, as a hobo. That whole hobo lifestyle, and the author's real life experiences colored that, story. So that was interesting. There is something to be said for diverse backgrounds, and I mean, I'll read anything almost, but I think that I just don't understand why the big hissy fit over this. Why not do your own Jack Ketchum anthology? Is there anything legally holding any of these people back from doing their own and let the markets decide, the readers decide who did the better one?
That I legitimately don't know, because there could very well be some, copyright issues if you try to put out like a Jack Ketchum tribute anthology without permission from his estate, like using his name like that.
Huh.
I don't know. I don't know copyright law, which is, given someone who wants to work a creative field, I really should.
Yeah. What else is going on? I understand you brought some stories to the table today.
Okay. Well, I guess I wanted to talk about what's going on in Puerto Rico. Now, there's been a number that's going around, like over 4,000 have died since the hurricane since the hurricane happened. More likely than not, that figure is not accurate. That figure came from an extrapolation that was done. The actual the actual figure that was released was that the death toll was somewhere between 800 and 8,000, and the number, the 4,000 number, got brought up because it was kind of in the middle there. The Based on that study that was done by Harvard and studies done by the other sources that have looked into it, the death toll is likely somewhere around 1,000, which is definitely much more than what the official number was, which was like 64 or something like that. So it does show that there is quite a bit awfulness going on there, and I definitely can't say that the response has been the best. And if the figure was over 4,000, people can only take so much. If I'm pretty sure if over 4,000 people had actually died, we'd be seeing like actual like rioting and so forth.
What do you think they should? What do you think they could be doing that they're not?
To be honest, I'm not sure. I really don't know how federal aid works because it's all tied up in so much bureaucracy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because I mean Puerto Ricans, they do pay taxes to the United States, so they should be able to get decent attention. They pay the taxes to the state, and they can't give you clean drinking water like they do in Flint, or they can't even do something as basic as fix the fucking potholes in the road.
Yeah.
People might get angry and start flipping cars and hanging up politicians by their necks and using machetes on them like they were fucking piñatas. But we can't just have that. I hate that.
Yeah. What was the woman's name that is their leader, the leader of Puerto Rico? What was her name?
Fuck, I can't remember her name.
She went around wearing a nasty shirt, and like reverting to a 13-year-old girl. Could it be that her leadership is not adequate for the situation as well?
Yeah, I certainly have doubts about her leadership. Because I don't know how much autonomy Puerto Rico has from the United States. From what I can tell, they're very, very heavily dependent on the United States, but it does seem that she did seem more interested in scoring political points against Trump than she did like putting effort into helping the people.
Yeah. Well, here I am on govtrack.us, and it says that Puerto Rico is a territory, not a state. What do you think of that?
And I've known that for pretty much all my life. But
I did.
The thing with being a territory is, in my understanding, that they basically have all the downsides of being an occupied country with not really any of the benefits of actually being a U.S. state. So they're kind of in a rock and a hard place in that sense.
Well, I know that the money was just bleeding out of the place too, right?
Yeah.
Are they bankrupt? Are they bankrupt yet?
Well, I don't know if they could be bankrupt without the United States being bankrupt.
Huh. Yeah.
I know they do. They have like heavy tariff taxes that they have to pay to the United States.
I remember seeing videos of people back when the hurricane happened and everything. People fishing in their living rooms, like diving into the water and pulling up a trout or something.
It's a pretty dire situation.
What would you do right now if you were told to evacuate and you stayed, and the water just kept coming and kept coming? I mean, and you had to go to the roof, or you had to get on top of something high, and things are floating and everything. What would you be thinking? Would you evacuate, or would you stay and weather the storm?
Well, it's a lot harder for Puerto Ricans to evacuate. I mean, they're on an island.
Yeah.
So
it's a hypothetical question, though.
I honestly don't know what I'd do.
I don't either.
I'm hoping that, because I'm guessing that people who had to evacuate probably had to have like money because they needed to get off the island, get a place to stay, things like that.
Yeah. Well, how
So
how how do they fix this situation? I'm interested. Uh, so they're just kind of isolated.
them being isolated on the island, yeah, that's it's definitely a problem. But as far as I can tell, they haven't had similar problems with humanitarian aid to Hawaii when things have happened, and
Now
with
that's
Alaska.
interesting. That's interesting. Hawaii is a state though, and
Yeah,
Puerto
so
Rico is not.
that's what I'm thinking, and the fact that they would release like a report that says, oh, only like 60 people have died when over 1,000 have is does show the complete incompetence that the federal government is handling it with.
I remember when Katrina happened. I mean, this in New Orleans, there was a criticism of the response, time and things, decisions they made. Um, I don't know, man. What? Hmm.
Yeah, I don't know either. I mean, I tend to take the I tend to I obviously don't have never handled federal aid and things like that, so maybe I shouldn't criticize. But the thing I like to remember what H.L. Mencken said, which is the fact I have no cure for the ills of the world is no reason for my accepting yours. It gives me more reason to think that yours are wrong.
Ah.
So I think I still have a right to criticize.
Oh, there's no question. Man, so to be honest, I know next to nothing about Puerto Rico, so for you, yeah. So what are they doing out there? How much of the island has power?
I don't think any of it does, besides people that have their own generators.
Even now.
As far as I can tell, yeah.
So they've been living what? How have they been living?
However, people live without power. I mean, it's like Flint, Michigan.
Clean
They've had
water.
no
Yeah.
clean drinking water for almost 4 years, and they just haven't been having to make do
Yeah.
with it
How
however they
how
can.
how does that happen in America?
Yeah, I mean, that's why a lot of people are worried that we're actually like regressing to a developing countries because things like this have been happening.
Huh?
And of course, there's places like in the Appalachians, it's basically like someone took a third world country and plopped it on the United States.
Well, what about the Appalachian?
Just the increasing poverty there,
Oh,
and in places like Detroit, uh, in let's see, San Francisco, the housing is so expensive there that even like a lot of like big time tech people can't afford to live there, and the homeless population is getting worse and worse.
you
Same
know,
with Los Angeles.
Chicago has the highest
Yeah.
gun crimes, doesn't it?
Yeah, and there's Chicago. There's a reason why it's called Chirac because of all the violence there.
Huh?
It's been getting increasingly worse. Trouble everywhere.
Yeah. I wouldn't say that we're back to being a developing country yet, but
Yeah,
as someone who isn't wouldn't call himself an out and outright Trump supporter, but did vote for him because there was no alternative for me. I will say this: it would. I think that maybe Trump needs to put the Twitter down and focus more on his daily tasks. I understand that to some people will say that it's his version of the fireside chats where he's bypassing the media to go directly to the people, but I mean, I think it's a little bit self-indulgent how much he relies on Twitter. You know?
yeah. The thing is, like the idea of a president using social media to bypass the media and talk directly to the people. I mean, that seems like a pretty damn good idea on paper. But with Trump, he's just tweeting out, "Oh, my dick is so fucking big and Mueller's is fucking microscopic."
I think that he should talk like he should conduct himself like a president, um, and not like
not like how he was conducting himself when he was just like a Hollywood guy who,
not like the
who
guy
just
that cussed me out in my private messages, 30 minutes ago, right?
right, not just
um,
acting like a standard, like well, pretty much how everybody else acts on Twitter.
yeah. It really does bring out the worst in us, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Do you remember ever seeing people act like this before social media? No, because they had to deal with each other in person.
right. I mean, if you go back, you can see cases of people, acting like douchebags on the internet. The problem is you had to like put actual effort into being a douchebag on the internet.
Yeah. The thing is, um, I sharpened my rhetoric when the left started trying to take everything and push me, push everything I believe in, into a corner. I felt like there was no other alternative but to get, you know, mean. So, what people have been hearing who have been following this journey of mine for the last 2 years, it's a direct response to that. Make no mistake. And some things that I say, I only say because I know it gets under their skin. I know it will work. I know it will, excite them, outrage them, and that's why I've been doing it. I always wanted to believe in a meeting of the minds, and some sort of mediation, but I feel I don't want it now. Uh,
Yeah, I generally I avoid like direct debates with people online because I used to do that all the time, and it's just like it's just not worth it.
what
I'd
did you
rather just
say? Well, go ahead.
go ahead with what you were
What,
saying.
what did you say? We talked about this one time, but did you say you identify more as what is your political, you know, uh,
Like
orientation?
I in general I just consider myself an anarchist. And it's like a more specific kind of anarchist. Guess I'd consider myself post left, which is sort of a case of kind of recognizing what the left criticizes, but also using their own tools to, call out the problems with the left.
So you see the craziness that they're exhibiting, right?
Right. To me, it's a case of, and another anarchist I know put it best. A lot of the so-called social justice warriors are basically just the uh, the moral majority of the modern day. They have this very fixed and rigid idea of morality, and like if you go against it, then I mean, then you're obviously a Nazi or whatever the fuck.
Yeah. I mean, they've beaten that horse. They've buried it and dug it back up again. This whole everybody's a Nazi thing. I can't keep up with it anymore. Who's the Hitler of the day? It's just. I actually said that to a friend. Well, who's the Hitler of the day? And then, sure enough, I look on Twitter, and somebody's getting compared to a Nazi. I can see I can telegraph their punches coming. That's the sad part. Um, how do we overcome this? Because it weighs on my mind every single day, Ben. How do we get past this and get back to some sanity? Um,
In On an individual level, for me, I just don't engage with someone who I know is crazy, whether they are an actual like online Nazi or whether they're a social justice warrior. If they try to engage me, I'll generally just make fun of them and then block them and move on.
yeah, yeah. Um, the witch hunting is the thing that they're tattling on each other, right? They're tattling on each other, or to their peers or to some social media authority, and it's
Right,
it's gross and disturbing.
right, right. Because another podcast I was on not too long ago, apparently the host of that contacted me and told me that someone had messaged him and asked if I was part of the alt right.
Well, we know that's not true. You're not even part of the alt left, are you?
No, not in the sense that it's usually used.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I mean, you. I think you were the one that introduced me to that whole, you know, culture though, of the actual alt left who, you know, aren't nearly as bad as right as what they've been built up to be.
Right, exactly. The whole alternative left term, it's kind of been thrown around a lot, but
It's been turned into a
it's
term that's synonymous with cuck or incel, right?
right for
Yeah.
among a lot of like in the mainstream at least, and a lot of like right leaning types. The among the more like actual people who are interested in that were it's a mixture of what you'd call Bernie Bros, people who basically are mainline Democrats except with less emphasis on identity politics. It's people like Robert Stark who is more of like a radical centrist than an actual leftist.
Yeah. The thing about centrism is that, and I think this is relevant in a tug of war, which we are most definitely engaged in. In a tug of war, what happens to the middle of the rope?
Right. Though with someone like Robert Stark, I call him a radical centrist because he doesn't really fit either left or right, but at the same time, a lot of his ideas could be considered quite radical.
Like what?
Like his ideas of universal basic income and automation. I'm pretty sure he's on board with that, at least from what I understand. Some of his racial ideas are more in line with like the alt right, which is definitely considered radical.
That sounds a little socialist. I mean, not to drop, uh, loaded words, but I mean, doesn't it?
But yeah, I mean that's kind of the point of radical centrism is taking like ideas from socialism and from uh, uh, liberalism, I guess liberal capitalism, and trying to combine them into something that functions.
Yeah,
It's a like more of an idea of uh, figure out something that works rather than basing it on ideology.
yeah. The thing about communism is, it seems tempting and seductive at first. You get your portion of bread one day, and then the next day you get a portion of chicken. The next day a portion of pork. The next day a portion of I don't know, fish, and maybe some coffee. Something extra. But then the next week that same thing repeats, and before you know it, you're bored, and you want to trade with other people. You want to trade for more of this or this, and people might start trading old things that they had before the new regime came in, and before you know it, you've got what again?
Right, exactly.
Capitalism, right?
Uh, Something along those lines.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Um, and it's funny. It's very damning how communism always seems to end with mass starvation, and not just mass starvation, but roadblocks to keep them blocked in and starving.
Yeah, there's a lot of things wrong. There's the problem of trying to control an economy from a centralized source, like the bureaucracy behind that. We kind of see that in Venezuela. Some of the apologists for Venezuela say that the real problem was that they were too dependent on oil. The thing is, though, that's the thing. They were dependent on oil, and because everything is centrally planned and bureaucratized, they don't really have the ability to switch direction when oil prices go down, and so everything suffers before they even have a chance to correct it.
What are they going to do
Again,
now?
at this point, I'm pretty sure it's just going to collapse, and then a new regime is going to come.
Oh man, those poor people. I hope that they don't resort to cannibalism. It happened in Russia. It happened in China. I read a book about Mao a few months back, where people actually resorted to eating feces and rotting flesh in order, just they were so starved under Mao's tyranny. How bleak is that, dude? Women would
Yeah.
cut their hair off to use in the furnaces to make steel, and guess what? That steel wasn't even useful for import. It was just useless. It was
Right.
it was not steel that could be produced. Uh,
Right, because they had this idea that they could just take people who had been farmers their whole lives and get them to start making steel.
yeah, and didn't they also take take the farmers in existence and move them out to or the city people and move them out to the farms? Right? They basically
Right.
switched them, right? And gosh, I don't know how many was it. 200 million? I could be wrong. It's a lot of people died under that. I don't know how we got onto communism, but what else is going on?
I wanted to talk about this story, which I think you'd be interested in. So there's this thing going around called Operation Backyard Brawl.
Huh?
Now I don't really believe in the what people are pushing with it, but I still think it's an interesting story. What was going on is apparently a veterans group whose whole thing is that they go around trying to find homeless veterans had been searching in like this in like these vacant woods. I think they were. It was somewhere in the southwest, so it was probably more like a desert or something like that. And they came across this sort of underground underground bunker, I think it was. It and they found they found a bunch of it looked like a underground camp basically, and what they've been claiming, although I've watched a couple of the videos that have been put up, but they don't really show this, but they've been claiming that there were like toys and pornography and condoms in there. So people are now claiming that it was a child sex ring camp,
Is this a new
and
Pizzagate? Is that what this is?
it's somewhat related. People are trying to connect it to that because apparently the land that it was on is owned by a construction company that has also made donations to the Clinton Foundation. So like I said, I don't really buy that it's a child sex camp or anything like that. It is a pretty interesting looking sort of underground bunker. If you go and find it, like more likely it's something that homelesses have been going in and out of and just leaving things there.
Mm.
And since it is in the Southwest, it's possible that it's being used by illegal immigrants
Uh,
as like a place to stop off. But like I said, they claimed they found like a bunch of like pornography and condoms and things like that, and others have claimed, oh, we found a grave site, but we didn't actually dig it up because it smelled too bad, and which is a little suspicious in my eyes. But
what is with
it,
all this child trafficking and sex trafficking and dungeons and where does it come from? How do
well,
you go
to
ahead?
me at least, it was the Pizzagate thing getting like out of hand. Like after Comet Pizza, they proved it was fuck all there. People just took the child sex ring idea and just kind of ran with it.
But those do exist. That's the thing.
Yeah, that's the
Um,
thing. They do exist, so it's definitely more believable than the sort of idea of like just ritual satanic murder and things like that.
yeah, and
But
Allison Mack, and her whole deal with Keith Rainier, I think, uh, with the Nexium cult. The one where they branded women's hips with the initials of the cult leader. Uh, she has been indicted for, I think, child trafficking or persuasion, something like that. I mean, she lured a lot of women into this guy's web. So, and I mean, that's an open and shut case as far as I can see. So there are instances where this really happens, and so I'll definitely look at that. Though, who is leading the charge at this Operation Backyard Brawl? Where's it?
yeah, it's something like that. I actually had some trouble finding it because apparently, like most of it is being thrown around on 4chan, which I don't go to anymore because it's uh, because it fucking sucks now. But the like I said, the people who initially found it was apparently a veterans group that was looking for homeless vets, and to my understanding, they apparently believed in the whole Pizzagate thing and just sort of jumped to the conclusion that it was a child sex ring camp. And like I said, the fact that the land is owned by a company that has given donations to the Clinton Foundation because because people think Clinton is connected with it.
Well, the
Which
Clinton
again,
Foundation, they've got their hands in everything, apparently, even though they're broke, right? I mean,
right. I don't think the Clintons themselves are broke.
no, the foundation,
But
isn't the foundation done for, though?
if it is, I don't know.
Okay.
But I guess this is sort of related. Did you hear that Bill Clinton apparently wrote a book with James Patterson?
A fiction book?
Yeah, it's called "The President Is Missing" or something like that.
When is it released yet?
I think it was just released. Yeah.
Oh, wow. That might be interesting to read.
Yeah, but
regardless of politics.
James Patterson, he's like the most successful like thriller writer, and it did actually genuinely confuse me to see that Bill Clinton was writing with him because I was under the impression that James Patterson's demographic was mostly older Republicans.
Right.
It's those kind of books.
Did not know that. I think Jimmy Carter has the record for most books written by a president, though. I mean, that guy just kept writing. He's still alive, isn't he?
Yeah.
Jimmy Carter?
Yeah, he's still alive.
I think that he wasn't always an effective leader, but man, when he pardoned those draft dodgers, I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, I don't either, definitely.
I certainly don't.
Yeah. That's who you should be pardoning instead of, yourself for murdering people. Right. Like the whole Trump thing.
And that doesn't make me any less grateful for those who did serve. But I just know that I wouldn't want that responsibility, of some of my fellow soldiers' lives on my shoulders or the enemy's lives on my shoulders. It's just not in my lifetime. I don't want to ever have to choose that. But so do we want to get to the book report, the bipolar book report yet? Are we ready to talk about some? I'm ready to lose myself in the written word, man. How about you?
Yeah, let's jump in.
Why don't you go first?
Okay. First one I meant to discuss on the last one, but I just never got around to it. It's called The School for Atheists by Arno Schmidt. He was a German writer who some of his work has been translated. The thing is, his work is very long and difficult to translate. He's almost like a German version of James Joyce, and The School for Atheists definitely feels like that. It's billed a novella, but it's 300 pages long, and it's taller than most books. So if it was like the same size of an average book, it'd probably be around 600.
That's no novella, by the way.
Yeah, I think that he kind of called it that to be a smartass because his actual novels were over like 1,000 pages long. The School for Atheists, what it's about is it takes place in when does it take place? Actually, it takes place in the year 2014, and remember this was written back in the 70s. And what it's about is about a judge named William Calderup, who is like a 70-year-old justice of the peace, and the basic plot of it is that he's hosting the United States Secretary of State to negotiate a peace treaty with the Chinese Secretary of State. And one of the funnier things is that the U.S. Secretary of State is nicknamed ISIS. And it's mostly a comedy. There's a lot of like sex jokes in it. There's a bunch of jokes where his granddaughter and her friend where guys end up walking in on them being undressed in ridiculous ways. there's a bunch of like sex puns in it. One weird thing he does is he will take a word, like the first two letters of a word, like a G-O, and then he'll have like two possible endings stacked on top of each other next to it. So like there'd be like the G-O, and then on the top next to it there'd be less, and then on the bottom there'd be thick, so it could be read in both possible ways. Let's see. He also has a lot of like weird punctuation. Like he'll like when there's descriptors of something, he'll put equal signs to the word it's describing. The whole thing is like written in a sort of play format, and apparently it's actually been performed at one point. I can't imagine how long that was. There's also
As like a play, you mean?
Well, it's written in a sort of play format, even though it's technically a novel. Then there's let's see. Then there's like a sort of story within a story that flashes back to when Calderup was young in the 70s. It's where he was on a ship with some other, like some rather strong atheists like himself and some missionaries, and the ship crashes, and the title comes from the fact that they were stuck on this island with missionaries and basically debating religion with them. Again, it's a little hard to follow the religious debates because of all the formal tricks going on.
Is there a lot of insider baseball with the religious discussions? I mean, a lot of terminology that you can't follow?
Not a lot of terminology. The debates seem rather simple to me, at least. But like I said, there's a lot of like formal tricks going on, like the way it's written as a play, the way he uses weird punctuation, the words with multiple endings, and then there are a bunch of like literary references, which I don't really get. So overall, it's I think it's a book that's worth the effort, but it's definitely one of the most difficult books I've read, probably the most difficult one since Finnegan's Wake.
Oh, you've read Finnegan's Wake? I haven't made that leap yet. That or Ulysses. But
Yeah.
How long did it take you to read this?
I'd say it took me like a month and a half, something like that.
See, Infinite Jest.
Yeah.
That one's about 1,000 pages, I would guess, right?
Yeah, something like that. It's like 1,200 pages, I think.
It has been met with so much critical acclaim, and but I got about 50 pages in, and I just couldn't follow it. Now that I'm older, I probably could, but some of these authors just are too smart for their own good. They try to outwit themselves, and that must be a torturous process. Because David Foster Wallace, ended up hanging himself. So, I wonder how tortured you could be to try to constantly have to stay ahead of yourself and everybody else, trying to outwit everything.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, I am somewhat of a fan of difficult books. Like, I actually legitimately enjoy Ulysses. I actually had a lot of fun reading that one. Finnegan's Wake. There was some good wordplay in there, but I couldn't understand anything that happened in it. I quite enjoyed Gravity's Rainbow. That one was a lot of fun, pretty funny. Apparently, like, Pynchon himself doesn't understand most of it because he was on drugs while he wrote a big chunk of it.
Yeah, Pynchon is a very elusive figure. I have not yet read any of his work, but he's one of those that I always plan to eventually. Just like the teachings of Don Juan, I think was that the name of it? No, not Don Juan. The hallucinogenic stuff. What is that?
From Pynchon?
Who?
The hallucinogenic stuff from Pynchon?
No. There's another author that sits on my shelf that I have yet to read, but they're always there. Like Pinchon, it was, and they wrote something like the Teachings of Don Juan or something. I don't know, Don something. It wasn't Don Quixote. It wasn't Don Quixote.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. Yeah, sorry.
That's a.
But yeah, I do think it requires effort, but I do think it's worth it. It's got a good sense of humor. It's pretty entertaining. The religious debate stuff is a little rudimentary by today's standards, but it's still kind of interesting. And some of the weird coincidences, like the fact that it takes place in 2014, the conflict between China and America, the fact that the U.S. Secretary of State is nicknamed ISIS. It's some pretty funny coincidences that came out of it. So, yeah, like I said, I think it's definitely worth trying to get a hold of and reading, though we'll be putting out a lot of effort into it. Let's see. Apparently the other books of his that have been translated were two sort of radio dialogue books of plays. And his magnum opus apparently was published in English. That's called, let me look that up here real quick. It's called Zettel's Dream, which is over 1,500 pages long. It's apparently written in like this same style. And what I can find on a plot summary, it has something to do with being a journey through Edgar Allan Poe's mind, I guess. So it definitely sounds interesting, but
it's definitely. Well, how much do you know about the Vikings?
A little bit.
Well, we have this picture of them being like very barbaric, and they play football with each other's head, with their fallen enemies' heads and everything, right? And
right.
They're
which is mostly not true. They actually had a very sort of ordered society, at least at home.
Right. I read. I just finished yesterday The Sea Wolves by Lars Brownworth, and let me tell you, it was incredible, the picture that he painted. A lot of times, like last show when I talked about the woman who wrote about the year of the four emperors in the Roman Empire, she had a problem with not really making the narrative, come alive. She didn't want to dramatize or anything. She very much stuck to the rigid academia, and if you're going to read, you want to lose yourself in it, right? I mean, Lars Brownworth doesn't have that problem. He describes he delights seemingly in describing the feats of cruelty that the Vikings were capable of, and I wanted to read a few passages under the Fair Use Act, by the way, from the Sea Wolves. Aea was brought before Ivar, who ordered that he be subjected to the dreaded blood eagle as a sacrifice to Odin. The king was stripped to the waist and tied down to the ground. A Viking warrior hacked at his ribs, breaking them and cutting a deep incision down either side of the spine. The lungs were then pulled out through the wounds and allowed to quiver like a pair of blood-stained wings until the king expired. How metal is that?
Yeah, you look in, you can find, like, most civilizations had some pretty awesome ways to kill people. And that's the problem with society today. We don't try to find awesome ways to kill people. We want to be quick and painless and humane and wham.
Yeah, dude, it is amazing how devious they were. There was this one guy, Rollo. He slaughtered every farm animal in sight when they were about to face off with this Frankish cavalry, and he built a wall of animal corpses to stave them off. He erected a wall of dead animals to slow them down. That's pretty metal too.
Yeah.
And there was one time when Rollo did bow to a king who liked to have his foot kissed, literally. And what he did is he grabbed the king's foot and upended him which I guess it pulled him up and out of the seat. So this guy was pretty hardcore. Now, one of the most cruel and devious feats that I ever read about in this book was from this guy named Hastine or Hastine. He said that he was dying and he wanted to be made. He wanted to be baptized, and so they go into the heart of Italy, maybe Venice. I can't remember, and yeah, I can't remember the name of the place right now, but it's somewhere in Italy. Near Rome, and they have this funeral for the guy because he expires, while he's being baptized and everything, at the same time period. And as he is saying the last rites or whatever, and saying, we look forward to the day of resurrection, the coffin lid comes off, and Hastine leaps out alive and cuts down the bishop and all his men, and they raid the city. I think that's pretty mean. They slaughtered the whole congregation. You know what? The Vikings were also very fair with their women. They would allow their women to settle, their affairs if they were absent or had, died. There was one woman called the Odd, the deep-minded. When she became a widow and her son died too, she found this new tract of land in Iceland, and she divided up the territory between her and her slaves. She freed the slaves, and she gave them part of the territory that she had claimed. So, it wasn't all savagery. And something else about the Vikings that I learned from this is that they are very good at assimilation. They can take cultural mores, and different, values, and they can kind of blend it in a way that is satisfying to them, and then continue to uphold it, So it was very interesting to learn about, all these horrible ways to die, courtesy of the Vikings. I mean, I thought the Romans were bad, dude, but these guys, I could see why they came later.
So, let's see. Next book I want to talk about is called Japanese Tales from Past Times, or from Times Past, actually. There's no author here. It's a collection of folk tales and fables from Japan. It's actually from I guess a collection called, and I'm going to butcher this pronunciation, the Konjaku Monogatari Shu, which is sort of like the 1001 Arabian Nights for Japan. It's a collection of tales from India, China, and Japan. And apparently the unabridged work is something like 20 volumes long, but like 3 of the volumes are apparently missing. So they were, it's like I said, it's fables and folk tales. A lot of them are like morality tales about the importance of piety, the consequences of greed, things like that. One of the more interesting ones is a story about how a bunch of bandits steal a bell from a shrine. One of the bandits pretends to be a monk, and he goes up to where the bell is. He asks to sleep where the bell is at, and he, pretends to die while he's there. And of course, because they have like a big taboo against being around dead bodies, nobody wants to go up there. So the rest of the bandits pretend to be his family and come to take him. But when they finally come back to make sure the body is gone, they see that the bell is gone as well. And that's when they realize that they were that they were all bandits that were that were just plotting to steal the bell. Some of them are very short. Like one story is a very simple story about how there was once a tree that was so big that the shadow of it prevented crops from growing, and the farmers had to appeal to the emperor to cut it down. And then they built a shrine where the tree was. There's a one story which is about a hunter who goes out with his dog, and he falls asleep against a tree and wakes up to his dog barking at him. At first he's ready to kill the dog, thinking it's it's gone rabid or something like that. But then the dog lunges at him and lunges at a snake that was about to eat him.
Oh.
And so it's a sort of a story about the loyalty of animals, of dogs.
Oh, that's beautiful.
There's another one which is about a sumo who gets a giant snake wraps itself around his arm, and he pulls the snake in half to get away from it. And they decide to test to see how strong the snake actually was. They a bunch of guys tie a rope to his arm and then have other guys pull, and they realize that it takes 100 men to pull before they get equal to the strength of what the snake was. Mm-hmm. So there's tales like that. There's one really beautiful story, which is a man who is leaving his wife for a new woman, but then the woman writes a poem begging him to stay, and he finds the poem so beautiful that he does stay with her. One of the more messed up stories is about a guy who had been sleeping around on his wife, who was keeping a mistress. He has a dream where he envisions his wife coming in and yelling at him about him cheating on her. And then when he talks to her the next day, he realizes she had the same dream, and they basically talk to each other in their sleep. But then it ends by saying that the woman became a snake in her next life because jealousy is a sin. Huh. And he doesn't get punished for cheating on her, apparently.
Well, that's interesting. But any stories about the Kappa in there?
There's not about Kappa that I remember. There are stories about fox demons.
Whoa.
Let's see. Like foxes transforming in order to deceive people.
Mm. Trickster spirit, right?
Right, exactly. Like foxes pretending to be beautiful women in order to fool men.
What's that horror movie that's? I think you have to watch it subtitled, but it's very popular with the BuzzFeed set, but it's actually good. That's the thing. Started with a K. You know what that is?
What's it about?
Well, it's like a collection of ghost stories. Only I think they're Asian. So
I don't know that one specifically. I do know
KW. I don't know. Quiet Tales. Quiet Tales. Does that ring a bell?
Kind of does. I don't. Some of the stories, I don't think the stories came from there because these are mostly just fables and folk tales, not really horror stories.
Yeah.
But you can kind of recognize where the roots of Rashomon came from, of the movie.
Oh.
There are a couple stories there that kind of resemble the plot to Rashomon.
Yeah.
Or at least aspects of the plot.
Huh.
So if you're interested in folk tales in general, it's definitely worth reading. It's a good selection. There are of course a lot of more didactic Buddhist stories in there, but I think those are interesting, especially in the context of medieval Japan.
Yeah. There's something very stoic about Japanese fables and stories in general, don't you think?
Yeah, the stories are definitely written in very straightforward prose, even in like translation, and they also have a bit of a rigid style, like you know how fairy tales in the West they start off once upon a time and end with they lived happily ever after. The all the stories in here start with in olden times, and the end of each one is so the story has been passed down to us.
Yeah, you know, that reminds me of a book that I read a few years ago called Animal Suicide. It was about these Japanese kids. They're basically kids. They're like in their I don't know, early 20s, college kids, you know. Um, and I don't know the pronunciation, but it's Leimi. That's the girl, the main character, the female. Do you want to take a stab at that pronunciation?
So I would think it would be lemma
Lima.
or rema, since there's no L in, in Japanese.
Oh, okay. She is her Chihuahua gets hung up, I think, and chokes to death. And she develops this fixation on the idea of animal suicide. And, you know, elephants they go off to a certain thing that it becomes an elephant graveyard when they know it's their time, right?
Right.
And she kind of she meets this guy named Dashi, I think, and he's just as interested. They start this little outfit called the Animal Suicide Club or something, and they go around to these places where cows, are said to jump off the cliff, and dogs are said to throw themselves off a bridge. Now, the place with the bridge and the dogs, that's a real place. You've heard of that, right?
Is it the Japanese suicide forest?
No, no, but I think they go there too. No, it's the. Hang on, I'll just type it in. Dog suicide bridge. uh, Overton Burn it's in West Dunbartonshire, Scotland, and
Oh yeah, I know about that.
and the dogs, man, they if you take a dog there, it's like something visually confuses them, and they will throw themselves, off the bridge. Well, they go there, and and they try to get to the root of why animals would kill themselves, and then humans, why humans get moody and suicidal too, and the two of them fall in love, or at least they mess around, and she says "I love you," and it messes this guy up worse than Patrick Swayze in Cocktail. And I don't want to spoil it, but there's a profound, kind of punch in the face at the end of Animal Suicide where he talks about he had spoken to her about how, those caves that are real, that you can walk in and they're just about as big as a room, and then there are other caves that are hundreds of miles deep. And he said, I'm the second cave, and it's interesting. It's an interesting exploration of human moodiness and everything. But since you mentioned Asian stories and everything, I thought I'd throw in Animal Suicide by Alexandro Chin. So
I'll have to look that up. That sounds pretty interesting.
I think it would be right up your alley. Yeah. So you go.
I'm sorry?
Yeah. So you go for it. It would be right up your alley. So yeah, you go for it though. Your next one.
Okay. My next one is High Life by Matthew Stocco. Have you read any of Stocco's work before?
A long time ago, I started to read Cows, and because it had been built up as something very shocking and edgy, and I don't remember if I finished it, but I liked what I read. But I don't have any other experience with him as of yet.
Well, High Life is his second novel. It's Cows was kind of surrealish. High Life is more of a straightforward sort of noir murder mystery, but it's still, I would say, it's just as fucked up as Cows. what it's about is about this guy named Jack who goes to Hollywood and he's obsessed with being famous. He he's like a very vapid in a lot of ways. He's obsessed with celebrity culture. There's one point in the book where he gets a job as uh, as like a TV presenter to like a, a, a sort of just like a TMZ-esque kind of show, and he's like over the moon to have that job. Um, what happened? He starts off the book like at the very bottom. He has no prospects. He's working at a donut place. He's married to a prostitute, but then his prostitute wife, she turns up murdered. They find her in a park with all of her organs removed, and after that he falls into a deep depression. He starts being stalked by a cop who's like a complete psychopath, just a complete pervert who basically like forces him into doing things like there's one particularly nasty scene is where he says he needs to get a semen sample from Jack in order to compare it with the semen that was found in his dead wife, and he basically makes him give him the semen sample right in front of him, and in order to get him off he shows him a picture of a dead body, which does get him off, which is another line that runs through. Jack discovers that he's a necrophile and likes to screw corpses. Then he meets this, I can't remember her name, but he meets this other woman who takes a liking to him, and she starts getting him built up in his career. She gets him the TV presenter job, gets him connected with an agency and all of that. And through all of this, he's basically under the thumb of both this pervert cop and this woman who we find out she gets off on. She's trained as a surgeon, and she gets off on cutting people open.
Oh no!
And
so wait, she's the killer, right?
She's the spoiler, she is, but there's a lot of misdirection that whether she is the actual killer or not.
Red herrings, yes.
Yeah, because there's a thing where with the girl's father, because he's sort of built up to be a killer as well, where he gets off on disemboweling dogs.
But who doesn't? Yeah.
Yeah. Which is, like I said, this is a very unpleasant book. So and then it's definitely like a great mystery. It just has like sort of Stoker's trademark nastiness to it. Plus, it's commentary on like the Hollywood system, on celebrity culture, and on the studio system is especially relevant today with everything that came out with Harvey Weinstein and the Me Too movement. Like it's like Stoker knew that it was nothing but rapists and lechers down the line in Hollywood.
Yeah. What's the name of it though? Again?
High Life.
Oh, it's the Matthew Stokoe one. Yes. So he didn't pass away, did he?
No, he's still alive.
I'm thinking of Ian Banks. Okay. So how many has he written now, Stokoe?
He's published 3. He's technically written 4. The 4th one was self-published for a while, but then he took it out of print so he could try to find an actual publisher for it. His work has kind of been in and out of print for a while. Like his first book was Cows, was published through Creation Books, and I don't know if you know everything that went down with them, but
no.
You should Google Creation Books fraud to find like a lot of the authors of Creation Books got screwed over really badly.
Really?
With Stokoe being one of them. And then he got his books published through Akashic Books, which is where they could be in print for a while. but then he decided to take them out of print just out of a displeasure with their promotion and their royalty structure. Then eventually he self-published all three of his books, and now he's looking for a publisher for his fourth book, Colony of Horrors, which actually has already been published in French, which no surprise there.
All right. Yeah, I remember some small press people hitting him up on social media a few years ago who were fans of him, and I don't think I know he didn't go with them, but I know that he's a bit of a commodity in the weird literature underworld. You're right. So.
Yeah, and it's actually funny to read interviews from him because he makes it clear that with his books he didn't even set out to be like a weird transgressive writer. It's just what kind of came out of him. He just set out to be like a regular fiction writer, but what came out of him was extremely nasty. So that's the box he's in now.
Would you recommend his other books besides Cows and High Life?
I definitely recommend Cows and High Life. Colony of Horrors I haven't read yet. I unfortunately didn't pick it up when I had the chance. And I do have his third book, Empty Mile, on my shelf, which I have not read yet. I've heard it's not nearly as nasty as his first two books.
Cool. I wanted to play something for you here. Is that it for is that it for that one?
Yeah, I'd say I definitely recommend picking up High Life. Just keep in mind it is quite nasty.
Right. Very cool. I wanted to play this, and I have a feeling that you'll recognize it instantly, but can you hear this?
I don't hear anything.
What about now?
And I still don't hear anything.
What about now? Is it picking up?
No, I'm just hearing noise.
Huh. Okay, anyway. So, I'll edit that out later. Did you ever watch the X-Men series as a kid?
I did, yeah.
Like, religiously? Were you there every Saturday morning at 11 o'clock?
I didn't watch it as often as I did, say, the Batman, but I did watch it on a fairly regular basis.
Mm-hmm. There's a book out by Eric Lewald, and he tracks down all of the producers, animators, the music, the music director, the bank rollers, everybody who had anything to do with the X-Men cartoon and the success of it. And it's called Previously on X-Men. And I could not resist picking this one up. It was such a staple of my childhood. And why do we all look back fondly on that cartoon as opposed to any other version of X-Men? What makes that cartoon so special? Tell me what you think.
Partially because I think it was well done. X-Men, for as expansive as it is, I think it managed to boil it down to the basic. The basics of it so that it didn't alienate people who never read the comics. And I think the writing was pretty solid for a Saturday morning kids cartoon.
It didn't try to make us, it didn't make us feel dumb. It treated us like, hey, with some, effort, you can follow what's going on. It's not that hard. It wasn't afraid, they weren't afraid to tell stories that kind of flirted with, our maturity. You okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just my chair squeaks a lot.
But the thing about, that was the great thing about that X-Men cartoon is that what you don't know is that the guy, I think Will Munio, he had terrible experiences making Kitty Pryde in the X-Men. I think it was called Pride in the X-Men. There was a goofy, like, cartoony, extremely, like, embarrassing theme song to it, straight out of the 80s where it was, and it had all that stuff, like hackneyed stuff like Stan Lee popping in at the beginning of the show to, talk about something that barely had anything to do with the story, breaking the fourth wall, talking to the true believers. It's interesting to hear Munio and these other guys talk about how Stan Lee became such a negative force on that cartoon as executive producer. He could talk to anybody and get anything reversed, but he was very counterproductive to their goals because he wanted that same hackneyed stuff, like, him talking in the opening and breaking the fourth wall to the true believers, and all this stuff like you saw on the Fantastic Four cartoon that was relegated to the 6 a.m. slot on Saturday mornings, right? So Stan Lee became a real negative force on that show. They used actors of, the stage. They originally went with, regular voice actors, and what they got back to hear the story told is like, they would have been embarrassed. They would have asked to have their name removed if they would have gone with the original voice actors that they sampled. So they started looking around for these stage actors, who were doing like mainstream high quality productions like Shakespeare and stuff. I think the guy who did Beast, he actually had a turn on that goofy syndicated show, the Adventures of Sinbad. But man, he did a great Beast, And it used to be something that they would do to top themselves. It was a competition to see how obscure they could be with the quotes that Beast would, emit in the middle of battle. He would quote like Cowper or Longfellow or Copernicus, and they would get more and more obscure quotes as the series went on. And it was funny that they also tell a story in here about Lady Deathstrike and how the Korean animation studio did such a good job on Lady Deathstrike's boobs. Like they moved so fluidly that they had to go back and ask them to cover up some more, and make them less jiggly, because remember, this is a kids show, and the Koreans were having some fun with it, but they said, I'm sorry, this isn't a prime time slot. You've got to cover up Lady Deathstrike's tits. And also they tried to sneak a penis candle into the Nightcrawler episode where Wolverine struggles with his lost faith, and Nightcrawler tells him there's a higher power always watching, you just have to believe and all that. Well, they snuck a penis candle into one of the scenes in Nightcrawler's monastery, but a lot of people remember that episode as one of the best. I don't know, what would you say was your favorite episode from that era?
I'll admit that I don't remember a lot of it, but let's see. If I had to, from what I recall, my favorite episode was either the crossover with Spider-Man or the episode where Apocalypse first showed up.
Yeah, what was it Apocalypse said? This is another thing. They had the great dialogue going, it was real snappy. I remember Apocalypse, Cable took a lunge at Apocalypse in that cartoon, and Apocalypse just knocked him back effortlessly, and he said, I am the rocks on the shores of eternity. I mean, doesn't get more badass than that, right?
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
and of course that they're lifting material from the comics, but in here there's a lot of stories about how hard they had to fight to keep loyal to the source material while still creating their own slant on it. A lot of times these guys were putting their necks on the line and saying, either this stays or I go. And then you had the merchandising department or the franchising department or whatever breathing down their necks about, put this toy in the show, feature it every 5 minutes, no joke. And they had to say, we are not doing that. and which was smart because they actually wanted them to use some sort of cars with X-Men heads on top of them, and they wanted them to use those as vehicles in the cartoon. It's like you don't wear a T-shirt with your face on it. It made no sense, right?
Yeah, I get they have to sell toys, but why that?
Yeah, and this book is filled with stories like that. It's called Previously on X-Men by Eric Lewald, and he even talks to the guy who created that awesome theme song that you couldn't hear a minute ago. It all started with a bass line, and I mean, you know that song immediately when you hear it, right? I mean,
Yeah, I definitely remember the theme song.
and it even explains why Professor X is charging towards in that intro towards the X-Men. He's on Magneto's side, charging on his little vehicle towards the X-Men. Well, that was a production gaffe.
Oh,
And they
I never noticed that.
yeah, they never corrected that, which is funny. But yeah, man, this allowed me to live a lot of good memories previously on X-Men. And I think that my favorite episodes were the ones where Professor X and Magneto had to join up to navigate the Savage Lands. And the X-Men finally located Professor X, and they were captured by Mr. Sinister and the Nasty Boys, and their powers wouldn't work on that island, the Savage Lands. And I mean, that is when I legitimately was jumping around the room, bouncing off the walls, watching all the action with the Kazar guy and his saber-toothed tiger helping him, because he knew the area, and Gambit, taken up for Rogue, and they could finally touch, right? That was a main point throughout season 1 and 2, was that they wanted to, they flirted with each other, but they couldn't touch because Rogue's power, she would sap the energy out of anybody she touched. And they finally got to touch when they were on that island.
Yeah. Before I move on to the next one, do you remember that one viral video that was like a dubbed version of the X-Men comic?
I'm
or
the Juggernaut
X-Men
bitch. I'm the Juggernaut.
I'm the Juggernaut bitch.
Yes.
I just thought of that while you were talking about it.
Who thought of that and put that together? I mean, and that was a hit at parties. That went viral, didn't it?
Yeah, that was like a viral video. I think that was even before like YouTube was a thing, or maybe when YouTube was just starting.
Yeah. Somebody overdubbed it. Yeah, I'm surprised they didn't mention that in the book, because a lot of things have this tendency to become viral again just out of nowhere due to irony and word of mouth, and these people that are doing the marketing are just scratching their heads like, all right, how do we trap this in a bottle? It's gone viral. This brand is revived again. How do we milk it for a little bit longer? And I wonder, how could they have milked that? I'm the Juggernaut bitch, Yeah, go ahead.
Didn't they actually throw that in one of the movies? They actually had the Juggernaut screaming, "I am the Juggernaut, bitch."
I think they did. I think it was, it may have been the Mutant Academy one with Rogue and Pyro as youngsters, right? It may have been that one.
I can't keep the X-Men movies straight. There's been too many of them.
I know, and even though they have different continuities, they all have Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, so...
Yeah, that makes things even more confusing.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody else could be Wolverine at this point. Oh, it talks a lot about the voice actors that they did get. The guy who did Wolverine was a jazz musician, believe it or not. That kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, I could definitely see him as one.
That gravelly
gruff voice.
That gravelly voice. Yeah, exactly. What's your next one?
My next one is The Sister Brothers by Patrick DeWitt. This is a Western. I wouldn't even say it even attempts to go off of that. It attempts to be ironic or self-aware or anything like that. It does feel like a very straightforward Western story. It's about these two brothers who their last name is Sisters, hence the name Sisters Brothers. Their names are Eli and Charlie, with Eli being the the narrator, who's the more down to earth stoic one, and Charlie being the more aggressive one. Basically, what they're doing is they are trying to go to they're trying to track down a prospector in San Francisco, I believe it is, to because he apparently stole from their boss, and along the way it has them, getting into various situations like one of their horses dying and having to get a new one. Things like meeting a kid on the street that had on the trail that had been abandoned by his family. When they get to there's a point where Eli they stay inside a cabin where a woman who they suspect is a witch is staying, and the woman puts this weird charm over the door, to which when they see it hanging there in the morning, they absolutely refuse to go through the door because they're that scared of the charm. So Charlie, who's the thinner one, has to climb out and try to find some tools to open the door. And at that point, they see Eli sees a bear who's about to kill his horse, so he has to run outside to kill it. And then he just runs back inside and pretends like he didn't leave. And throughout the rest of the book, he suspects that he has some kind of curse placed on him for walking through the door with that charm over him, because he has a lot of unfortunate things where he falls in love with a girl who ends up either dying or not being who he thought she was, who he thought she was.
Right.
And then they eventually get to it's Sacramento where they were going. They get to Sacramento, and they find that their target has already left Sacramento, and is set up a prospecting claim. And what they find is the reason the boss wanted him dead is because he had invented a chemical that basically, when you put it in the water, it basically changes the color of the water where gold is. So it makes it extremely easy to find gold, and they actually join forces with them as protectors. But then they find that the chemical is extremely corrosive, which means that they slowly get sick as they use this chemical to find more gold. And eventually, the prospector dies, and one of them loses. I think it's Charlie, loses the use of his shooting hand, and they get all their gold stolen by Native Americans. And so at that point, they basically decide to go and kill their own boss. And after they successfully sneak in and kill him, they just move back in with their mother. Going through it, it seems, when I describe it like this, it seems almost like a meandering and pointless story, and it kind of is, but there's a certain charm to it. It's very picker-esque. It feels like a unsentimental Western, like one that isn't bound by having to satisfy the audience. So it's very, very. I personally found it very entertaining, and I definitely recommend it to anyone who likes westerns.
If I'm remembering right, it's got the cover that's kind of like Edward Gorey or Tim Burton type art, right?
Yeah, it's like a
Skulls.
moon in the background with their two heads being like the skull eyes.
Yeah, the Sisters Brothers or the Sister Brothers?
The Sisters Brothers.
Okay. Cool. It also sounds a little bit like the Coen brothers.
Yeah, I definitely compare it to the Coen brothers. There's actually a movie being made of it. Let me see if I can find who's making that movie, because if it is the Coen brothers, that would be perfect. Let's see. Sisters, brothers. Let's see. Who's... Apparently John C. Reilly is playing one of the Sisters brothers. It says here the director is Jacques Audidard. I don't know who that is.
That name doesn't ring a bell to me either. Huh.
Let's see what else he's done. Let's see. I don't recognize anything on his list here.
Yeah, I'm gonna bump that one up. That of all of them, I think that and School for Atheists seem the most compelling so far.
Yeah, I definitely recommend it.
Was there a sequel, or did he write a different standalone novel?
No, I think he only has 2 novels so far. The other one is called Libations. I think that one, I've read an excerpt of that, and it's basically like written in the form of notes for a novel of a guy observing people at the bar he regularly attends.
Yeah. Okay. Is that it on that one?
Yeah, that's it on that one.
How familiar are you with Severed Press?
It sounds familiar. I'd probably recognize one of their titles if you name them off.
Okay, they do a lot of like monster fiction, like you used to find on the Sci-Fi Channel on the weekends, like the Big Bug books and the monster, things like Sasquatch, Yeti, harpies, land shark.
Didn't Gabino Iglesias have one of his books published through them? Hungry Darkness?
I think it was a Loch Ness book, if I'm not mistaken, yeah. So they specialize in that kind of stuff. You've got Vietnam Black was one about a giant centipede. You've got the Down from Beast Mountain. Let's see, the Dover Demon. That's one of the ones that I want to talk about from them tonight, by Hunter Shea. Are you familiar with that legend, the Dover Demon?
It sounds familiar. Is it called something else? I want to say that there's another name for that creature that I'm more familiar with.
Gosh, I'm not sure, but it was bald, looked like a little gray alien kind of, and it was said to have tendril-like fingers. And Hunter Shea, I think, is the first author to bring this urban legend, this lesser-known urban legend, to literary life. And it's about these kids who witnessed this in the, 60s, 70s, something like that, 80s. Whoa, that's your air, isn't it?
Yeah, that's, it's not my air, it's the neighbor's air again.
It'll work itself out, won't it?
Yeah, that's, the apartments here are a little close together, so.
Yeah. In the late 70s, this guy named Sam and his friends, they see this creature, and, several decades later, they move on with their lives, and see, Sam runs a comic book shop while his wife, does the corporate shit to keep the bills paid. And basically, there's not much subtext to get into with this book. It pretty much is surface, what's there is there. But I will say that Hunter Shea pushed this legend about as far as he could, and he tied it all the way back to like 2000 BC.
Yeah. I think that's
a lawnmower.
Yeah, it's either a lawn. Yeah, that's a lawnmower. I guess they're mowing the lawn down there.
Jeez.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. It happens. Maybe I can edit around it or something. But yeah. So the Dover Demon, it was a good exercise in bringing a lesser known legend to life. Now, if we could just see somebody do justice to the Loveland Frog and the Maryland Goatman. But there's another Severed Press book that I have to mention, and it's it's by this really well learned survivalist guy in real life named Michael Hodges, and it's called The Puller. I know the title is not the best, but it's been optioned for motion picture in as yeah.
So why do you have to move on now? It's
Yeah,
7:30.
really. Well, I guess is he's gone now. Okay, but The Puller has been optioned for film, and it's about this guy named Matt who goes after his both his girlfriend and his father die. He goes into the woods to get peace of mind back at this old cabin that he took all his friends, his girlfriend, and his family to at one time or another. His dog is even dead, so he already sounds like a
Stop.
he sounds like a country music song.
Yeah.
But as his weekend advances, things start to go worse and worse, and he's being attacked by forces that he cannot see, and he's waking up beside dead bears, and he can't make sense of what's going on. This had one of the most touching endings I have ever read, and I really love one thing I really love about Michael Hodges' prose is how he's able to describe the scenery. He's able to describe every bush and shrub and flower and explain what's in bloom and what's not, and what's in season. I mean, you can tell that this guy is has had actual experiences hunting and fishing, and that's what brings his prose to life. And I'll even go further and recommend his follow-up book, Invasive, but I don't want to talk too much about that this time because that would, and I'll hand it back over to you for your next one. But The Puller and The Dover Demon, both from Severed Press. I like it. I like the fact that they're consistent in delivering the monster lit. They must have capable editors to bring out this in the authors. But so you go next.
Okay. Next one I want to talk about is it's called The Dalai Camel. It's one I recently reviewed for Culture Vultures. The author is C.E. Rashlin. What it's about is it's the spiritual journey of a guy who is called the Dalai Camel. It starts off where he's in the afterlife in heaven. They don't really something like that, and he finds that he's been chosen to become the Dalai Camel, which is like a big spiritual leader on Earth, and he's reincarnated, and it turns out that he's birthed from a camel, even though he's still a human. He just has like a head shaped like a camel's humps, and like the whole thing is him going around trying to do his training to become the Dalai Camel, and it's of course done in a very like weird, over the top way. It's a very like Bizarro-ish kind of book, even though I don't know if it's like Bizarro proper. But there's a part in the book where he tries to row from Europe to South America, and he forgets his paddles, so he has to paddle with his arms and legs. And at one point, like, heaven starts throwing down food for him from heaven, and there's a part where a mermaid comes up and he has sex with her, but it turns out the mermaid was already dead and was reanimated by the gods for something to him to have sex with, which is messed up, and the book doesn't really seem aware about how messed up it is, which is one of the big flaws with it. And it's basically, then there's a part where he like arrives in Los Angeles, and he tries to spread his message by getting together 12 followers and going on TV, but it all like it goes to hell when they go to like a Disney World, I think it is, and they end up going into the teacup ride, which spins so fast that all of his disciples vomit all over everyone. And then in the ending, he 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 actually goes to meet the Dalai Lama. Get it, Dalai Camel, Dalai Lama, and he has to take the Dalai uh, Lama's place at the United Nations to deliver a speech, and the speech is a sort of honestly, it's just kind of like a boilerplate, everyone should get along kind of speech. And after that, um, he obtains his rank as a Dalai Camel and ascends with the other gods like Buddha and Jehovah and Muhammad and all of that. It's I think I made the book sound a little more interesting than it is because it does have some very funny parts, but it's written in this very like over the top way that makes it feel like someone's elbowing me in the ribs every time I turn the page. It's it feels the need on pointing out on how it's so weird, it's so bizarre, like all the time. Like yes, we get it. And there's a weird thing where like there's a lot of jokes in the book that just don't make sense. There's a running gag where the word bear is spelled in all capitals throughout the entire book, and the reason they give is because the bear that's on the cover made that a stipulation to pose on the cover, but there's no bear in the book. There never is, so it's just like a joke that doesn't make any sense. I think the author does have some potential to write a much better book down the line if he, has like an editor to hold him back.
C.E. what?
Rachlin,
Okay.
Rachlin.
Okay. 330 pages is long for a Bizarro book, which that's interesting though. That wouldn't deter
Yeah,
me. That wouldn't deter me from reading. I just know that a lot of them generally stay between 150 at best, generally.
it, yeah, it does at times tend to feel very tedious because it's a lot of times it's just a lot of times it's just a bunch of jokes slammed together, basically. Jokes that go on for too long and things like that. Because I feel like almost half of this book could have been cut, and it would have been like a lot tighter and a lot more enjoyable.
Was this just self-published, or was it by a certain press?
It was. I'm pretty sure it's self-published.
Okay, it's probably a smart thing to do. Interesting. The Dalai Camel, like the Dalai Lama, only camel.
Yeah.
Okay. Huh. Um, we talk a lot on here about political correctness and how often misunderstood both sides can be. I want to talk about a short story in a collection, just one short story from this collection, We Live Inside You by Jeremy Robert Johnson. And the story I want to talk about is called A Flood of Harriers. It was originally published in Cemetery Dance, and it's about this guy who's going with his wife, Sage, to Burning Man. And, they're having a fairly pedestrian afternoon, and she decides that she has to pee for the fifth time. And she says, I don't care where it is, stop at the next, available restroom. And he says he had heard that this area has a bad reputation. Now, he does pull over at the next rest stop. She gets out. He goes too, for her sake and, as much as his. And sure enough, there's this group of Native Americans who are skulking nearby and watching, making lewd comments about his wife's ass, and making chit chat with him from far away as he's coming out of the bathroom. Things start to get heated, and he's scared to death. The woman comes out and gives her husband a look of, let's get the hell out of here now. She gives him the keys, I think, or she already had, he gives her the keys while they're talking, and she, is waiting, and things are getting worse and worse, and he's just like the head Indian or whatever is, you know, trying to hassle him out of money and everything. And it gets to a point where there is a physical confrontation of, and the you know, the husband doesn't come out so well, and in fact he crumbles like a little bitch, runs back to the car. Before he can even shut the door, his wife is, you know, locking every door, and the Indian kicks in the bumper as they're driving off, and he's saying, "Don't ever come back here. We're going to get crazy on you if you do." Sure enough, they get to Burning Man, and the wife is giving him this cold shoulder the whole way, and, you know, acting like she's traumatized and everything. And when they're gathered around a campfire, she admits to him that in that moment earlier, she realized she wasn't married to the man she thought she was, and that he seemed like he needed her protection more than she needed his. And then, to add insult to injury, she kisses him on the forehead like a little puppy dog, like a little lost puppy dog, and she goes to have fun at Burning Man. What? And Jesus.
Now it's motorcycles.
Of course. And then it'll be a parade with elephants and a trombone section. But
yeah, police helicopters and shit.
Okay, yeah, get it all out of your system, buddy. Anyway.
Yeah, we get it. Your dick is small, and you have to make noises to compensate for it.
Anyway, yeah, speaking of overcompensating, so this guy is basically totally emasculated, and his wife ends up leaving him. There's a hallucination where I guess he imagines the Indians there again, and they're tearing him apart. What's interesting is the most about this story is the real life lore around it, the backstory of how he published this with Cemetery Dance, and there was this huge blow up that it was critical of Native Americans or something. Imagine my surprise, you know, and he was getting compared to Goebbels according to this anecdote that he publishes at the end of the book. So Jeremy Robert Johnson went through this at the beginning of his career. And yet, and I'm sure he's not the only one, and yet he stays silent. They all stay silent about this kind of reactionaryism, this professional outrage, you know. Stephen Graham Jones, you're familiar with his work at all?
Yeah, he actually is a Native American author, isn't he?
Yes, exactly. Well, he came out in defense of Jeremy Robert Johnson, and said that he didn't find there was anything particularly insulting about his culture in that book. It's relaying a real-life incident that happened, although I'm sure he dramatized it and turned the volume up to 11, you know, with the whole actually getting physically attacked. I mean, that's not out of the realm of plausibility. If you can't protect your girl, deep down they may develop that perspective. There's nothing. I think that's more plausible than anything to write something like that. That she just saw him as this little puppy dog instead of, you know, someone that would stand by her and protect her. Right.
Right. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Straw Dogs, but that's a big theme in that.
Oh yeah, they just totally have their way with her, and yeah, you're right. And he just kind of takes it until he loses it. Yeah. See, because firmly ingrained in the DNA code of women is the need to be taken care of, and there's nothing wrong with that, you know. And without getting on a soapbox here, people, I'm trying to think how to word this. Women have a reasonable expectation to be provided for and protected, most likely even when they say otherwise. It's just ingrained in them, and the men will have varying results in providing for and protecting them. But this is nature, and it's the same way a mother hen in a fire or a storm will surround the little chicks with her wings, and so after the fire has cleared, the hen may have died, but the little chickies, can you can find them under those wings and they're safe. There is a reasonable expectation of protection between genders and across family roles and everything, and I just think it's a shame that a story this great and this realistic, hyper-realistic even, that people would even dare try to contextualize it as something hateful. The short story is called A Flood of Harriers, and it's in the collection We Live Inside You. I don't even know if you can even find this anymore, because didn't Jeremy Robert Johnson take all of his books out of print?
Well, I know that both Angel Dust Apocalypse and We Live Inside You were taken out of print because a number of the stories were reprinted in Entropy and Bloom. I don't know if We Are the Harriers is in that, but or Flood of Harriers, whatever it's called, but it might still be in that book.
Mm-hmm.
I do know he also took Extinction Journals out of print. I guess because he's trying to take everything that was Swallow Down Press out of print and try to place it elsewhere.
Okay. How many more do you have left to talk about?
Let's see. I think I'll talk about one more.
Okay.
I want to talk about the book I finished just today. It's called, before I talk about this, I do want to say that this is The Weird by S.C. Burke. The Weird. He's the editor for Nihilism Revised, who is publishing my short story collection, so there's that disclaimer. The Weird, it doesn't have a plot or anything. It's very experimental. It does have several reoccurring characters, like a sort of archetypical femme fatale named Jane Doe, a troublesome kid named TJ, which stands for something like Terrajoules. There's the arsonist who burns air. Like I said, there's really no plot or anything. There are vignettes that become like more narrative driven. There's a part at the beginning where the narrator and Jane Doe take I can't remember what kind of business it is, but they take a business for hostage and end up murdering everyone inside. To sort of bookend that, there's another part at the end where a character is just called the Gunman goes on a shooting spree, which ends up killing a bunch of people. And it ends with him committing suicide after he realized that he killed his own bastard son. There's a sort of experimental structure to the book itself as well. Like there are several pages that are white text on a black background, and those parts are called Conversations in a Black Hole, which are these sort of like surreal exchanges. There's a part at the end that's written mostly in code, which is it's about someone piloting a machine and interacting with the machine until they have a breakdown and self-destruct. Trying to think of what else I can discuss.
This is the publisher. Yeah. This is by the publisher who's going to be releasing one of your books forthcoming, right?
Yes.
Nihilism Revisited. Yes.
Okay. Revised.
Okay. Nihilism Revised. Okay. Nihilism Revised.
Yes. Yeah, it's kind of hard to talk about because the thing is one thing is there's no real central theme to this experimental book. It seems very stream of consciousness. like even the title, like the weird, doesn't really say much. Um, but it is, even in spite of the fact that it really doesn't have like a central thread holding it together, it is still very intense. And I got through it in just a couple days, despite of how experimental it was. So I would highly recommend it.
How's Nihilism Revised doing? How many are they releasing a quarter, would you say?
They're releasing a bunch of books this year. I would suggest like going on Facebook and liking their page, because they have like a list of the books that they've released and that are coming out.
Cool. They also publish Zach something.
Zach Ferguson. He's
Yeah.
like he's the other head of the Nihilism Revised.
Yeah, that's his book I wanted to get to, and never got around to it at present. But they even have an interesting art style that I think says, hey, this is uniquely us. Was that it for that one, or?
Yeah, that's.
So this is experimental. This is experimental fiction, basically, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I'd have to compare it to another book. I'd say it's most like Humanity is the Devil by Jordan Crawl.
So
except it has even less of a central plot than that book.
Cut up method, stream of consciousness, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you heard of Christopher Rufty?
Name sounds familiar, but I don't think I couldn't name anything by him.
Well, Pillowface is incredible, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's about a killer with a pillowcase over his face, and he escapes from his crazy family and wanders, through the woods and into the backyard of this boy who's burying his dog named Joel Olson, and he loves comic books and horror movies and all this, and their parents died, and his sister had to step up and get a job and take care of him. And it's summer vacation. It's the beginning of summer vacation. Joel Olson befriends this crazy guy with a pillow over his head, who he thinks is just crazy and misunderstood. Doesn't realize he's a crazed maniac killer. Well, one thing Rufty does with this that is very interesting is how he's able to juggle all the different disparate plot threads, like the horny employer who's lusting after the Olsen sister, and how he sneaks into her house to wait on her without realizing that Pillowface is there, being hidden by the little brother Joel, and there's an interesting confrontation between those two. And then you have Pillowface's family is trying to track him down, and they're these crazy shell-shocked, spiteful, veterans who are bitter about their, the shape, the cards they were dealt. And it's just all these disparate plot threads are juggled so expertly. I mean, I could see it all in my head just like a movie. That's Pillowface by Christopher Rufty. And I guess I will close out my selection on that note. So you sure there's nothing else you got?
Nah, there's not much else I have to say.
Cool. Well, I think that was a good one. There were some other things I wanted to get to, but I think I'm going to leave it there because I'm tired from this marathon, and we'll pick it up next time. Ben, thanks for coming on, buddy, and we'll pick it up next time. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks again for having me.
Excellent.
stick.